Welcome to today's Daily Chronicle. Today is Thursday, April 2nd, 2025. How Europeans are reacting to the Yemen war plans group chat. London. The revelation that senior intelligence and defense officials in the Trump administration discussed details of military operation in Yemen on a Signal app group chat has prompted a variety of reactions across Europe, including an acknowledgement that the scornful tone about Europe that administration officials employed will simply cement a continuing deterioration of transatlantic ties. The Signal messages recorded U.S. National Security Advisor Mike Waltz saying that only U.S. rather than European naval forces would be able to take military action against the Houthis to safeguard shipping in the Red Sea near Yemen. Vice President Vance then describes such action as bailing Europe out again. Before Defense Attorney Secretary Pete Hegseth labeled Europe's reliance on U.S. military might as freeloading that was pathetic. Europe has historically leaned heavily on the United States for the support of its military capabilities, including its intelligence gathering, nuclear umbrella, and aerial defense weapon system. The decades-long presence of tens of thousands of U.S. troops in Europe since the end of World War II. Has also played an important deterrent role against possible adversaries that might seek to attack Europe, including Russia. Yet the criticism in the Signal group chat, which adventurously included the Atlantic editor-in-chief, Jeffrey Goldberg, provided a window into normally private policy discussions and political posturing in the Trump administration, which in recent months has also publicly criticized European governments for not just military spending that is lower than in the U.S., but also policy-making decisions linked to the culture that are fundamentally different in character from the vision of the current White House. I think what might be a shock, says Olivia O'Sullivan, director of the UK in the World Programme at the Chatham House think tank in London, is this sense of deeper anti-Europe feeling, not just frustration that Europe isn't shouldering practical burdens, which after all still betrays this sense that we are all part of an alliance together, that we share values, the sense that voices very close to the president making these monumentous decisions are kind of fundamentally opposed to the way Europe organizes itself or its values. But this should come as no surprise, say other commenters, including Pierre Haskey, a longtime French newspaper editorialist and president of the advocacy group Reporters Without Borders. For Europeans, there's a sense of a broken relationship in discovering the extent of American hostility, Husky told French public radio. But like in love, there is life after a breakup. And it's important to make the most of your new life. But as European governments race to increase their defense and spending in preparation for a future where U.S. Secretary support may continue to falter, the dismissive tone of the signal messages has helped underline the speed at which the historical transatlantic alliance that underpins NATO is flailing. Aside from the laxity with which the world's most powerful politicians share top-secret military strikes in an unsecured chat group, blared a comment piece in Germany's most read newspaper, Bild. The unfriendly words towards Europe from the Americans are further proof that the U.S. no longer considers us a vital ally. This breakdown in ties is troubling to many in Europe, including Americans based there. This breakdown in ties, it's really unprecedented, and these are not challenges the European institutions are well set up to deal with. According to Ian Lesser, a Brussels-based distinguished fellow at the German Marshall Fund who previously served in the State Department, Brussels itself, the European Union itself, NATO, certainly with the US as part of it, is simply not well set up to address the multifaceted challenge. One uncomfortable coincidence that highlighted the dichotomy facing European leaders this week as they seek to navigate the Trump administration's conflation of military spending and trade policy was the arrival in Washington on Tuesday in the European Union's Trade Commissioner, Maros Sefcovic, hoping to prevent further tariffs on EU products of the kind the U.S. introduced this month on steel and aluminum. In the UK, Foreign Secretary David Lammy and Prime Minister Keir Starmer have worked hard to separate themselves from the Europe in the eyes of President Trump and his cabinet. There are things the Brits can try because they're clearly seeking to sort of differentiate themselves to some degree and stay relatively close to the Trump administration, according to Chatham's House O'Sullivan. But it's becoming very challenging because it feels like there's a value difference here, rather than just a difference in terms of strategy or who's picking up the tab. Britain is the United States' closest ally when it comes to intelligence sharing, and over the past year or so, British naval and airborne forces have played a small but significant role in operations against Houthi forces in Yemen that were the center of the recent Signal Group chat revelations. As a consequence, British political leaders have been forced to field thorny inquiries about the security lapse, including from lawmakers in a parliamentary committee hearing on Tuesday, when the UK Minister for the Armed Forces, Luke Pollard, faced a series of questions about it. My general rule would be that if there's operational decisions that are being taken, we should all, regardless of our role within defense, take our information sharing seriously, Pollard said in response to one lawmaker who had asked what would happen to British officials if they were to share sensitive military details in a similar fashion. There would be a clear consequence and disciplinary process for anyone that would be following those procedures. UK Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner was at pains to avoid undiplomatic language when she was repeatedly pressed on the topic in a BBC interview. We've been sharing intelligence and information for many decades, and we continue to do that through our secure networks, Rayner said. It is the U.S. and the U.S. President and the government to explain and decide what they're doing in regards to their security and that signal messaging group. Some apparent satisfaction was derived from the lapse among some in Europe, as underlined in an Italian newspaper. We can't have someone in the Oval Office who doesn't understand the meaning of the word classified. The newspaper quoted Trump as saying during the 2016 presidential election campaign. Then it showcased his opponent in the race, Hillary Clinton, responding to the signal revelations on social media. State schizorazando, in Italian. You have got to be kidding. Ancient Greek and Roman statues often smelled like roses, a new study says. A sculpture of Aphrodite is displayed during an exhibition of ancient Greek art in 2007 in Beijing, China. The collection is from the 5th and 4th centuries BC. Many ancient statues were scented, a researcher says. A few years ago, researchers have known for many years that there was more to ancient Greek and Roman statues than the plain white marble you typically see in museums. A few years ago, museum visitors in New York City finally got the opportunity to see how the statues would actually have appeared when they were created, painted in vibrant colors. Now, a researcher says there's another aspect to these statues to consider: how they smelled. Cecily Brons, a senior researcher and curator at the Glyptotek Museum's collection of ancient Greek and Roman art in Copenhagen, Denmark, says ancient texts provide evidence that statues were often scented with perfumes, oils, and waxes. Her study, The Scent of Ancient Greco-Roman Sculpture, was published in the Oxford Journal of Archaeology this month. Ancient Greek and Roman sculptures were not just experienced visually. Brons writes in her article, such scents could function as a way of creating a sensorial experience and even facilitating interaction between the image and the observer without the use of touch. Previous research has shown that these statues were painted and sometimes decorated with jewelry and textiles, she writes. But the adding of scents would have made the experience of them not only a visual, but also an olfactory one. A variety of flowers and herbs were used to make the perfumes. But evidence points to rose perfume being the most widely used type, Brons said in an email to NPR. Some records of the scents coming from ancient bookkeeping, about 2,800 stones with inscriptions have been found on the Greek island of Delos, some of which are inventories from temples on the island. These inscriptions are extremely interesting and have some clear evidence for the use of perfumes and scented oils for the cult images in the temple on the island, Brons said in her email. Brons also referenced numerous ancient writers as evidence of the practice. For example, the Greek physician Dioscorides provided a recipe for the Myron Rodinon. which translates to perfume made from roses. Pausanias, a Greek geographer, writes that a statue of Zeus at the Olympia was treated with olive oil, according to Bronze. Bronze is fond of a quote she attributes to the Roman philosopher Cicero about the treatment of the statue of Artemis. People anointed her with precious unguents and crowned her with chaplets and flowers. Cicero wrote, the Cicero quote clearly shows that perfumes and flower wreaths were used for the cult images, Bronze said. Physical evidence of scents on statues is hard to come by, as the oils and waxes degrade over time. One exception is a statue of the Ptolemaic queen, Bernice II. From the 3rd century BC, Bronze said previous research did not detect a scent, but did detect evidence of beeswax spread on the statue. There were religious reasons for the practice. An ancient Greek statue of Hermes displayed in the Archaeological Museum in Olympia, Greece in 2012. The motivation for scenting and adorning statues was primarily religious. It was primarily a ritual act, as a sort of veneration for the cult images, said Bronze. Though she added that some non-religious statues have been scented as well. Sculptures were usually painted and often were decorated with jewelry and flower wreaths. The aims of this was to make them seem alive, expressed the Greek term mimesis, Bronze wrote in her email. In her article, Bronze notes that some oils and waxes were used to protect, preserve the statues and their paint. Verity Platt, a professor at Cornell University's Department of Classics, who specializes in Greek and Roman art history and was not involved in the study, said scenting, adorning with flowers were also part of Greek social life. For instance, according to Platt, Greek men would scent their bodies before they gathered to drink at the symposium, a social gathering where they participate in rituals related to Dionysus, the Greek god of wine and theater. There were also animal sacrifices that involved smell. Within Greek myth, there's this idea that the smell goes up to the gods on Mount Olympus, and it delights them. They love the smell of sacrifice. So pleasing the gods with smells that are offerings is a part of a bigger realm of sensory landscape. Of Greek religion, Platt told NPR. There is religion embedded in everything in the ancient world, she added. There isn't really a concept of the secular. Platt says that among experts in classic studies, the idea that statues were scented is already well established. But given the attention the study has received, it's clear many people hadn't heard about the practice before. Clearly it strikes a chord, she said, noting it follows recent interest in the notion that statues were painted in bright colors. It's exciting to think about the ancient world as not just polychrome, but also a multisensory in all kinds of ways. This art exhibition is divisive or eye-opening. It depends who you ask. John Ahern and Rigoberto Torres, Jameson Jefferson and Gloria Bollock, 1992, acrylic on hydrocalplaster life cast. On any given day, these are hundreds of different exhibitions on view at the Smithsonian mini museums. But a recent White House executive order singled one out. The Shape of Power, Stories, Race, and Sculpture at the Smithsonian American Art Museum shows 82 artworks by 70 artists, spanning some 3 centuries from the late 1700s to the present day. Historical statues are put in context that sheds new light on their meaning. Contemporary sculptures reflect on current issues. While the executive order claims the exhibition is an example of how the Smithsonian has come under the influence of a divisive race-centered ideology, visitors and critics see a collection that probes historical representation, stereotypes, and identity. We look at 3 works that are used to examine American perceptions of race at different points in history. Pioneer women used to celebrate a land rush in the 1920s. At a time when a sexy cigarette-smoking flapper were in vogue, but most monuments were for men. Oil businessman E.W. Marland spearheaded a competition to honor the women. Who married their men and set out with them on their conquest to the west. He said that with this new monument, he hoped to preserve for the children of our children the story of our mother's fight and toil and courage. The winning design for sculptor Brian Baker was unveiled in a grand ceremony in Ponca City, Oklahoma in 1930. The day's festivities included a pageant commemorating the land runs of 1889 and 1893. Tens of thousands of white settlers were allowed to claim land previously set aside by the government for Native American tribes after they were forced from their homelands in the Southeast. Ceremony at the Pioneer Women's Statue in Ponca City, Oklahoma. Photograph, September 5th, 1941. According to the Shape of Power catalog, Baker's statue of a steadfast white woman supports the ideology of manifest destiny that claimed the land, known as the United States, was ordained by God to belong to white Christians. Smithsonian curators were not available to comment, but the catalog drew on research from Cynthia Prescott, author of Pioneer Mother Monuments. She tells the NPR the exhibition is trying to understand and unpack this more complicated, racialized meaning for this artwork and reveal it to its audience. Prescott believes that this is the core idea and impulse that executive order is pushing back against. The White House did not respond to NPR's request for comment on this story. Using art to create a tangible connection between people. As a Puerto Rican who grew up in Port Philadelphia, artist Roberto Lugo has researched the removal of land that belonged to his ancestors. His sculpture, DNA Study Revisited, is a colorful, life-size self-portrait made from a mold of his body when he was 100 pounds heavier than he is now. Roberto Lugo, DNA Study Revisited, 2022. Urethane resin, life cast, foam, wire, and acrylic paint. Many of us grew up in food deserts and places where obesity was very common because of the lack of quality food, said Lugo. So when I made a piece like this, I like to allow myself to be vulnerable and let it all out. Because then everybody around you allows themselves also to be vulnerable. Lugo believes that art has the capacity to do things that words can't, especially when it comes to bringing people of different backgrounds and political beliefs together, including white people. I think for many people who support Trump, I think they feel disenfranchised and that their quality of life suffers because they're not given opportunities because of their race, said Lugo. I feel as if that should be a point where we connect with one another. That's precisely how people of color feel. Opportunity for growth. Jillian Valade, who is black, was visiting the art museum and said she was struck by Girl Skating, a 1906 sculpture by Apastinia St. Leger Eberl, who was known for depicting the girl glides on one roller skate, her arms stretched out, squealing in delight and fear. Abstinia St. Leger Eberly, Girl Skating, 1907, bronze. The exhibition points out that at the time, Italian, Eastern European, and Jewish immigrants were often not considered white. With many go to the South Seas to find, I found here, Eberly was quoted as saying in 1937. People who were just enough apart from me to act as symbols, yet close enough to feel their common humanity. Valade said she hadn't realized that white people also had been othered. and she found the works in The Shape of Power eye-opening and an opportunity to see another point of view and interrogate with their own biases. The Shape of Power is on view at the Smithsonian American Art Museum through mid-September.